Well, welcome to welcome to section 2.7 of the book Transgender Ideology and Gender Dysphoria, A Catholic Response. I'm Jake Thibault. I'm here to talk this time about epistemology. This is the last section within chapter 2. Now, if you've been reading along with this book, chapter 2 is probably the most difficult, followed by chapter 3. I probably shouldn't have had the two most difficult chapters at the beginning, but it's kind of laying the groundwork for understanding the issue better. You know, it's kind of looking at these bigger questions, the human condition, as we covered last time, human nature. This time, epistemology, which is the study of truth, the study of knowledge. What do we consider to be true? You know, we kind of have to lay out this groundwork before we really understand, get into the transgender issue itself, I think is important. So without further ado, let's jump in. So it's tough, you know, this is like drinking out of a fire hydrant, right? Epistemology is a huge field, fairly complicated, you know, once you get into it. And I'm trying to give a 10-page view of it. While also focusing on the transgender issue. So it's a bit difficult to get through. So if you had some trouble with this section, I'm not surprised. The question is of epistemology is, what is truth? Now, there's a lot of ways that we can look at something being true. So, you know, if we were to say, I love you, right? Is that a true statement, right? Probably, right? If you have a relationship with the person and you say you love them, then probably that's true. Is it something that you can verify? Well, not with direct evidence, right? With circumstantial evidence, you can prove you love someone, but not directly. You're not going to find scientific evidence that a person loves another person, right? You can kind of gather it from the circumstances. So, you know, is it true though? Well, it might be the most important truth in your life, but it's not something that can necessarily be proven. Other things, you know, if you say, well, the bank got robbed at 6:05 on a Friday night, well, is that true? Well, we can verify it with cameras, eyewitnesses. We can catch the crooks, right? The money was there, now it's not there. Right? There's all types of ways that we could prove that this happened as a matter of fact, right? That this happened as a fact. Versus love, a little less, we would less likely call that a fact, but it's just likely true, right? So when we're talking about if something is true or not, you kind of have to look at, well, what type of issue is it, right? Certain things matter, right? If I say, well, I feel like I love this person, well, that might be enough to be true, right? But if I say, well, I feel that this vaccine is going to kill people, well, that's the feelings in that case don't matter because the data matters, right? The data would matter when it comes to scientific, if you're talking about scientific evidence, right? If you're talking about something like scientific evidence, your feelings don't matter, right? In terms of it being true or not. Other things, it does matter. So you have to kind of determine within each field what is the spectrum of information we're willing to take in to consider if something is true or not, right? Given the circumstances, different things will count as truth differently, right? This makes sense. So this book is about the transgender issue, so we're going to go through this a little bit of, well, what knowledge, what truth is relevant for determining the truth, right? This is, some people might argue your feelings determine the truth of your sex and gender. Other people might say it's biology, right? Others would say whether you fit socially within a category, right? Whether other people recognize you as a member of that category, right? This kind of goes back to the beginning with the biological, the personal, and the social, right? Some of this is dealing with epistemology now as well. Within the classical Thomistic approach, our approach is recta ratio, which is a rectified reason, or reason put through the right path, right? Right reasoning is the right way to approach something. So, question for other people would then be, well, what is right reasoning? So that's something we'll get into, the recta ratio. Pope John Paul II wrote, self-determination and the closely related self-governance often requires that action be taken in the name of bare truth and the good, bare truth about the good, in the name of values that are not felt. It even may require that action be taken against one's actual feelings. So this kind of lays out the framework that within Catholic epistemology, sometimes your feelings don't matter, right? Sometimes your feelings are not the truth, but bare truth about the good might be more telling. So that kind of lays out at least some framing before we jump in. Another issue with it kind of lays out like a smorgasbord, right? A buffet. People like Edith Stein, she talks about the phenomenology of empathy, which is an interesting one. Edith Stein, otherwise known as Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. And she wrote, she called it also the primordial given. And here's the catch with the primordial given, right? If I say, I know what it's like to be a woman, right? I feel like I'm a woman. Well, the catch with that, from a logical perspective, is, well, how do I know what a woman feels like for me to say that that is how I feel, right? My experience within this primordial given is really only of myself, right? I can't have an experience other than my actual experience, right? I can't say, well, I know what it's like to be a black person. Actually, I can't, right? Within my mind, I might have an imagination of what it feels like to be a black person, maybe based on black people that I know, friends, right? But I don't actually know, right? This is just my projection into another person's reality that's giving me this idea that I know what this feels like. If I were to say, well, I know what it's like to be Chinese, well, I'm not Chinese, so it would be difficult for me to say that I absolutely know what that feels like, or I know what it feels like to be living in the Middle Ages, right? No matter how much I study, I don't really know what it's like to live in the Middle Ages, right? This phenomenology of empathy, it's you're kind of stuck. You're stuck in yourself. For better or worse, you're stuck within yourself, and you're not really able to have that level of empathy that you could enter into another person's existence, right? This is part of the challenge. And this is a big part of the challenge for the transgender issue, because right, if you return back to the DSM-5 and gender dysphoria, it is the desire to be a person of the opposite sex. Could say, well, I desire it because I feel as if I am a member of the opposite sex. But one of the questions from a philosophical perspective would be, well, how do you know what that feels like, right? I know just even from my own experience, I actually don't even really know what it feels like to be a man or white or right or middle-aged, right? I don't actually know how that feels because I don't really have. I haven't experienced something else, so I don't have anything to compare it to, right? Age, I can compare it to it a bit, right? Because I used to be young, and now I'm not, right? Now I'm middle-aged. So now I could say, well, I don't feel like I did when I was 20, right? That's a reality, right? To say I know what it feels like to be 60, though, I don't, right? Because I have never been 60, right? So this is, again, that primordial given, right? I only have what I have been given, right? I only have what I am. It's really impossible for me to know what it is to be something else, regardless of how much I might have an empathy for it. I don't actually know this. And if we don't have any gatekeeping when it comes to this, this is when it gets really strange, right? Just recently, there was a guy from England who said that he felt as if he were Korean. So he had surgery done to make his eyes look more like squinty, right? Kind of stereotyping Asian people. Well, Asian people typically don't like to be stereotyped as squinty-eyed, right? Generally, that's not something that they prefer. And he doesn't speak Korean. He knows a few words. He'd been to Korea, but not for any really extended periods of time. So to say, well, I was born in England, but I really feel as if I'm Korean. I am Korean. My identity is Korean. When you don't speak Korean, you've barely been to Korea, and it seems like your idea of being Korean is K-pop and giving yourself pointy eyes, right? Which Korean people in general have been very negative against, right? Korean people, if you said, oh, I love Korean culture, I love Korea, I want to go to Korea, you'd probably find open arms, right? People from Korea welcoming you and being very excited to show you their culture, very hospitable. But when you say, I am Korean, and to prove it, I'm going to get plastic surgery to give myself Korean eyes, kind of offensive, right? It's kind of offensive, right? And the same thing would be with all race, right? If somebody were to say, well, I'm really black. Well, I'm flattered that you want to be black, if you're a black person. I'm flattered that you also want to be black, but you don't have the slightest clue what you're talking about, right? Or it's like somebody who was born rich who says, oh, I know what it's like to be poor. You've never been poor, so really you don't, right? This is these issues of identity politics, right, where you have to be something, or sometimes you have to virtue signal, but ultimately you need some type of gatekeeping. Be like, oh, you're an Englishman, therefore you are not Korean, right? We're not going to go along with that, right? Which is typically what people do, right? When it comes to transracial, we typically say, no, I don't think so. Or trans-species, like saying, oh, I'm really a dog or a horse or something like that. Usually people say, no, you're not, right? If you want to pretend like you are in your house, that's fine, but I'm not. My reality is not going to adjust to your imagination, right? It would typically go along. When it comes to the transgender issue, we make an exception, right? We more likely as a society, we change the laws, we change the system to accommodate transgender, but not any other forms of trans anything else, right? So, but ultimately, the similar philosophical problems with transgender as there would be with other types of trans categories, right? Again, epistemology following the smorgasbord. But how do we determine that any of this is real or not real, moral or immoral, right? How do we really determine if we say, yeah, we need gatekeeping? Yeah, we need gatekeeping, but what determines gatekeeping? Why can't we say, if I feel like I'm Korean, then I'm Korean, or if I feel like I'm black, or if I feel like I'm a horse, or if I feel like I'm a woman, then I'm a woman? How do we determine gatekeeping? And again, we look at the Thomistic approach versus the other approaches. So the modern approach to understanding this would be John Locke. John Locke, he claims that meaning requires a meaning maker, right? Unless there is an ultimate meaning maker, unless there is a creator, you don't have a creation, right? And John Locke is coming at this from an atheistic perspective. So he's saying, since there is no God, there is no creation, there's only the world. Right? We are not creation. Because there is no meaning maker, so no ultimate meaning maker, there is no meaning, right? It's just raw flesh, right? It's just raw flesh. And this is kind of the perspective of a lot of modern people and a lot of gender theorists. Again, I was speaking to, or tweeting back and forth privately with Rachel and Williams, who's on the opposite side of this perspective. And, she's clearly a rejection of this idea, right? She's coming at it more from an atheistic perspective. But clearly, she's a Lockean, right? In this regard, she's a Lockean, I suppose. Right? If there's no creator, there's no creation. If there's no meaning maker, there's no meaning. Therefore, do what you like, right? Transhuman, right? Be whatever you want, right? It's raw flesh to form in any way that you desire, right? So, but under this Lockean view, if you want to be Korean, be Korean. If you want to be a unicorn, be a unicorn, right? It really doesn't matter, right? There's no teleology, right? There's no ultimate purpose. There's no ultimate being. There's no ultimate direction that we're moving into. It's just what it is, right? That's that Lockean view, which is very honest, right? It's very honest. But a lot of modern people follow this John Locke perspective. Again, there's no normativity of creation. There's no ultimate lawgiver, right? There's no natural law. There's no rules built in, right? It's just whatever you want. Everything becomes relative or subjective. There's no there can't be really any gatekeeping in here other than maybe social gatekeeping, but there's no intrinsic gatekeeping in it. Now, the Catholic response to this, I took, I could take 100 different articles as a response to this, but I took on the topic Archbishop Robert Carlson of St. Louis in his pastoral letter, Compassion and Challenge, about the transgender issue. He pointed out 3 ways of dealing with these types of emotions. One, he says, feelings should really not define our identity. This is a presumption of the modern gender theorists, that my feelings determine who I am, right? Both in terms of gender, sex, anything else, right? You have people with, I don't know, the amount of tattoos and hair coloring, and as a full disclosure, I had blue hair when I was 21 for the, or maybe younger, for the feast of Our Lady of Sorrows. So I'm aware I stand in a glass house. But, this kind of, that your identity is just based on how you feel, ends up becoming who you are, right? My feelings determine who I am. This is clearly not a Catholic response, right? You can't, your identity doesn't change based on how you feel. Your feelings are fickle. Your feelings change. Your identity should stay the same. It's who you are, right? Your being doesn't change, right? Accidental qualities might, but your being is who you are, and they don't change. Another point that Archbishop Carlson points out is human integrity means acting on your persistent desires, right? This is another part of the modern world, is that if you have a persistent desires, then you have to be true to yourself, right? It's this idea that I must be true to myself. Again, von Balthasar talks about this kind of ego drama versus the theodrama, right? If you think about almost nearly every movie nowadays, particularly ones that aim at the young, it's all about being who you truly are, right? That's the moral of the story. If you want to, at the end of the story, what's the moral of the story? Find your voice, be yourself, and you are great, right? You're really a superhero once you just discover who you really are, right? This is kind of the narrative throughout all of our modern stories, right? It's all about who you are, being true to yourself. But what Archbishop Carlson points out in this is that, we have persistent desires. It doesn't mean we have to act on them, right? That's an example. People are married for a number of years. They find somebody else attractive. Well, no kidding, right? There are a lot of other attractive people on the world other than the person you married. And throughout a lifetime, some of them will seem like a far better choice than the person that you married. Just because you have the desire doesn't mean that you have to pursue the desire, right? There's a lot of things we desire, and they aren't all things that lead to our good, right? If I followed my desire, I would eat nothing but chocolate ice cream, right? There would be a detrimental effect if I only ate chocolate ice cream, right? If we don't follow our desires, part of being an adult is forsaking our desires, or at least that rectitudo, right? The holding holding it to the light of reason, right? Our desires put to the light of reason. And lastly, the Archbishop Carlson points out that typically in our modern world, our subjective form is that anyone who does not affirm our feelings and actions hates us, which often becomes the church, because the church acts as a gatekeeper. And, if you don't fully approve of everything that I feel, then you hate me and you're erasing my existence, right? You're leading to my death, right? You're killing me. Right? This is the language of the modern world where, again, if you disagree with me, then you hate me. When you can disagree with people and not hate them, right? Sometimes disagreeing with people just means you disagree with them, especially when you're dealing with philosophy. Philosophy needs to be debated. Therefore, to say I have a philosophy, and if you disagree with my philosophy, you're going to erase me. Well, then you're not talking about a philosophy. You're talking about just a pure ideology, right? Just an ideology. As Archbishop Carlson points out, here's a little picture of him in the bottom left. For gender ideology, a feeling or desire is authentic and good if it is persistent, insistent, and consistent. This is on a lot of the guidelines for transgender health. That if your gender dysphoria is persistent, insistent, and consistent, therefore then you really are transgender. That's the scientific language. So he's saying if you have these feelings which are persistent, insistent, consistent, but any number of examples can tell us that a sinful and unhelpful desires and feelings that are contrary to our identity as God's children lead us away from heaven and can be persistent, insistent, and consistent. Again, yeah. So desires and feelings change, and they can lead us in all types of directions. As the example that you can think of in Plato is the horse, the chariot with all the horses, and the horses are pulling the chariot in all these different directions. It takes prudence and reason of the charioteer to hold those horses together, right? To move in a direction. Otherwise, they're going to pull you in three different directions and destroy the chariot and throw you to the ground, right? It's reason that holds those horses, the emotions, into check. Now, part of the debate. Pope Francis points out political life no longer has to do with healthy debate, but long-term plans to improve people's lives and advance the common good, but only with slick marketing techniques primarily aimed at discrediting others. In this craven exchange of charges and countercharges, debate degenerates into permanent state of disagreement and confrontation. Well, he wrote this in 2020, and that is about the state of America today, right? We have foregone the ability to have a debate and discuss this, which we would call philosophy. And when we move into this idea of marketing techniques to discredit the other side, this is sophism. Going back to the ancient world, Plato, Socrates, they were very against the sophists. Sophists would be on the street trying to convince you of their perspective, right? There were whole classes that taught you debate, sophistry. Socrates and Plato, Aristotle, they thought we don't want sophistry, we want the truth, right? We want the truth, and we want to get to the truth. Doesn't matter if you agree with me or not, the truth is the truth. And this part has been lost. We have moved from philosophy to sophistry. Part of this we see in our culture where we can't talk about politics or religion in public anymore, right? We're a taboo topic, so we're kind of taught in life never to discuss politics or religion in public, but those are the most important things to discuss. Being trained on how to do philosophy and to do it well would be more helpful than the idea of don't talk about it, because then the consequence is sophistry, where you just market to people clever ideas, but we can't actually think critically about the ideas. Well, this is a bit of the problem. The Catholic approach is we should be able to debate the ideas, right? We should be able to debate. And the consequence that comes out of this type of sophistry is identity politics, right? And we could talk about so many things, but identity politics becomes difficult. You can't have an opinion in the culture any longer unless you are a black, lesbian, transgender, paraplegic, right? Because you have to first, before you can make your statement, you have to first lay out how big of a victim you are, which then builds your credibility for your ability to say anything. If you're not from a privileged class of disabled people or underprivileged people, then you really should stay quiet and listen, right? That's the perspective. Again, it's sophistry, because under philosophy, ideas stand or fall on their own feet. If it is a true idea, then it can stand whether or not a black person said it or a white person, a male said it or a female, a transgender person or a cisgender person, a foreigner or a local. Truth will stand on its own 2 feet if it's true. If it's not, all those other gender identity statements don't give it truth. It doesn't become true because an underprivileged person says it, right? And this is very much against the current moment right now, where you either have to be part of those, you have to be a member of an underprivileged class, or you have to virtue signal, right? You have to first say, well, I'm not a black trans woman, so I'm aware of my privilege, therefore I'm going to say this, but I say it with great humility because I need to virtue signal first in order to get any of the points, the credits, to be able to make a point. This is very dangerous, and now it's even working against, often it was women, the feminist movement that kind of created this idea, and now it's being used against them in the transgender issue, where when a woman tries to speak about transgender issues, about bathroom issues or locker room issues or things like that, they're told that they don't have a valid voice in the discussion because they are not they are not from the privileged class of being transgender. They're only women, right? Before it was women had the voice because they were women, and men had to be quiet. Now men and women, cisgender, have to be quiet. And if you think I'm exaggerating, you could see, I can understand if you think that I'm exaggerating. But, just recently there was a spa in California, I believe it was California, and there was a supposedly transgender person. All that's required is for you to identify yourself as transgender, for you to be transgender. It doesn't require any additional steps. But a male to female person went into a woman's locker room, spa, and was naked with his male genitalia out in the female locker room. And a woman came out to complain and was very vocal, saying, "That's a man. I'm seeing his penis. I'm seeing this. I'm in the women's locker room. I don't want to be around this, and people come to the defense saying, that's a transgender person. How dare you say that, right? Your opinion doesn't matter. What and the crowd's view and the view of the spa was, you need to get over it because that's a transgender person. Therefore, your opinion does not matter because you are not from a disprivileged enough position, right? You're not from the right position. Therefore, you can't have an opinion. Even though it's a woman's locker room, you could say, realistically, well, trans women should have a voice and cisgender women should have a voice. And maybe we could come to a reasonable compromise, right, between cisgender women and transgender women, right? We can, even if we take the liberal approach that they are both fully women, maybe we could have a conversation about it. But instead, because of identity politics, the cisgender women have no say, and the transgender women do, because they are from a more disprivileged class. Likewise, when some of these debates were coming out, there was I forget now the university, it was maybe Harvard, or it was a fairly elite university, but they were having a discussion about the transgender bathroom issue, which I know it can get very politicized, but what some women were saying is, I had been raped in the past by men. I don't feel comfortable being around men's bodies. To have a unisex changing room for transgender people or anybody who wants to go to the special changing room, that would be fine with me. But I don't, as somebody who had been raped many times, I don't feel comfortable being around strangers in a state of undress around the male body. And to even begin that conversation, people started shouting, trans women are women, trans women, and to the point that it was so loud and so disruptive that the discussion, this campus-wide discussion lasted about 3 minutes because they just learned that, we can't have a conversation about this, which was ended up being kind of the activist point is, well, we can't debate trans rights because you are erasing and damaging transgender people by even talking about it, right? This becomes part of the debate, right? Part of the issue that it can't even be discussed, right? We can't find a way to accommodate everyone. And going back to that case in California, it turns out later on that person, male to female, had been in a number of issues before with, I guess he was outside of a woman's house, masturbating or something like this outside of a woman's house. This person was clearly just a pervert, which is, you wouldn't even really want to say this person is truly transgender. They're just a pervert who's using the system. But you had the mass audience defending the sex offender, and the woman who had legitimate concerns was silenced, right? So this becomes part of this issue of the debate. Again, why is this even in here? Well, because it's totally Lockean, right? It's totally Lockean. There is no gatekeeping. There is no meaning maker. There is no objective facts. There's no objective truth. It's only what you feel. When we have this, fine. If I say I'm a woman, I'm a woman. If I say I'm a man, I'm a man. And everybody has to get along. Everyone has to go along with it, right? This is the challenge. And I know this sounds somewhat transphobic, maybe. It might sound that way to some people. But I think that there are many transgender people who are quite aware that when you have no gatekeeping, right? There's no gatekeeping, you're going to get people who abuse it, right? If you are truly transgender, then there can be some type of gatekeeping, there can be some type of objective criteria, we can have some type of philosophical discussion, we can talk about ways in which we can keep both transgender people safe and cisgender women safe, right? We could have reasonable conversations. And I think there's plenty of transgender people that I know that would be very reasonable about this, right? It's the people who are committed to ideology that are not, right? It's the people who are Lockean, right? Lockean cisgender people, and Lockean transgender people have a lot in common. But realist transgender people and realist cisgender people have a lot in common, right? It's less to do with the transgender, it's more to do with, are you Lockean or are you Thomistic Aristotelian, right? This is an epistemological question. Again, back to rectitude appetitus, right? The rectified appetite, right? How do we deal with that type of situation of identity politics? Again, you hold it to the light of reason, right? I feel this, I feel that. Hold it to the light of reason, right? This is how you deal with it. All racism and sexism and things like this. This is all because of people's emotions, right? People are afraid of black people. They're afraid of men. They're afraid of women. They're afraid of this. People are afraid, right? This is emotions, right? How do you overcome these emotions? Right reason, right? Right reason. Right? If you had right reason, you wouldn't be afraid of black people. If you were right reason, you wouldn't be afraid of men or women, right? Right reason holds things into the proper truth, right? The truth of the matter. And we have the virtues, right? So transgender under the DSM-5 is always talking about strong desire, strong desire, strong desire. We have virtues that hold strong desires into right proportion, right, to right rectitude. Temperance, for example, holds into check concupiscence, which is desire, right? So having temperance holds it into balance, desire. So we'll get into that more when we get into the virtues section. Approaching the end. I think this will be a 1-hour video, though. Dualism, the man above me, Rene Descartes, the Cartesian, he brings this into prevalence again, right? We have kind of a dualism with Plato and Socrates. Aristotle brings unity. And then we have Aristotle, right? Aristotle's our way of being until the moderns pop up. And this is Rene Descartes bringing in the moderns. And he's going back to Plato saying, you know what's brilliant? Plato. It's like, well, if you were a lover of history, you would just go, oh, but we've already done Plato, right? We are, right? Not that Plato's entirely wrong, but the dualism, right? Why are we going back to dualism, right? Aristotle overcame dualism, then the Arianism pops up in the church, and then the church defeats dualism again. We're back to unity. And then Descartes brings up dualism again, right? We're living still in a very dualistic perspective, and it's never-ending heresy. And this is something that we still deal with, even within Christianity. Probably quite a few people sitting in the pews who are truly dualist in their perspective. And this dualism is the separation of the body and the soul. And it's probably not Descartes' first intention, but it's the cogito ergo sum issue, right? If in Descartes' perspective, right, you can't trust the outside world. How do you know you're not deceived? This is the movie of the Matrix, right? How do you know you're not Neo in a pod run by machines that are using you as a battery, and that you're really just, your mind is in a virtual reality place, right? How do you know that it's real, right? That's this question. And what Descartes comes up with is that I know that I am real. I don't know if anything else is real, right? Because if I say I think, therefore I am, well, then if I can say I think, then there's an I right in this. And so if I didn't exist, I wouldn't even be able to say I think, therefore I am, right? So I know that the mind exists. Now, I can't trust my hands. I can't trust my body. I can't trust the mirror. I can't trust anything outside of my mind, which would really even include the brain, right? I can't trust the physical world, the phenomenal world, right? The phenomenal world, the outside world. I can only trust the noumenal, the spirit, right? The noumenal world I can trust. This then gets also interpreted in the modern sense, the sensio ergo sum. I feel, therefore I am, right? That's the next state of it. I think, therefore I am, but now it's even more. It's just I feel, therefore I am. And what I feel is what's true, right? Descartes was really that I think means that I exist, which means my mind exists. But even more to the next step, I feel this, therefore I cannot trust the outside world, right? So I feel like a woman. When I look in the mirror, I see a man. I can't trust the mirror. I can only trust my feelings, right? This is the dualism, right? The noumenal, my spirit of how I feel, that's real. The material world, I don't even know if it's real. I'll treat it like it's kind of real, but it is secondary to my mind, right? Or my feelings. Because that I am certain is real. I only kind of guess that the outside world is real, right? The evil genius could be deceiving me, but God would not allow it. But maybe I could be slightly deceived, right? I might not be totally deceived by the evil genius, but I could be slightly deceived. Therefore, I can't really trust it. I can trust my mind, or in the modern world, my feelings. This is dualism. Now, the Thomistic perspective, the Aristotelian perspective, is hylomorphism. It's the unity of body and soul, right? So the noumenal and the phenomenal come together, right? This is how this exactly takes place is its own topic, which has not been fully understood. What's the relationship between the mind and the brain, right? This is a really complicated one, right? If we close our eyes and we think we have a sense of our mind, but we know that it's rooted in the brain and not our kidneys, right? Where are these thoughts coming from? They're coming from our brain. Are we simply a brain, or are we more than a brain, right? These are these debates with this. But the hylomorphic view is that the mind and the body are united as one, right? We are not beings which possess a body. We're not a ghost within a machine. We are our bodies, right? We are. Our spirit is us, right? It's our essence, and we are essence and matter, right? It would be like, it's like the color red, right? Red is nice, but there's actually nothing that is red, right? Red without matter, you wouldn't be able to see. You need, here's a bottle, right? It has to be red liquid, right? It has to be a red deodorant stick. It has to be a red clip, right? The clip, the deodorant stick, the liquid, that's the matter. But it has, so the color, it has to be with something, right? This is essence and form, right? But at the same time, matter without the essence would have a similar problem, right? If this had no color whatsoever, right? Really no color, right? Not white, but no color. We wouldn't see it, right? It'd be invisible, right? So there is a relationship. This is kind of just a common way of explaining it. It's not as philosophical as it should be, but you can't just have essence without being, and you can't have being without essence, right? You can't have matter without essence, and you can't have essence without matter, right? They go hand in hand together, right? They're unified. To separate the red from this clip or to separate the clip from the red is just a ridiculous idea, right? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because it's, and if you say, well, I could turn it yellow, I could paint. Well, to remove color, right? To remove color from the clip would be impossible. And to have color without a material object would be impossible. They don't exist except in actuality. They don't exist in really hypothetical, right? In the potential, right? Now, not everyone agrees with this hylomorphism of Aristotle and Aquinas. People like Baruch Spinoza tried to get around it by saying everything is really just essentially spirit, right? It's all spirit. right? If we see something, it's just our minds filling it in, right? We don't really know that any of this exists, right? Kind of taking Descartes and running with it, right? It's just, we are in the matrix. In reality, the only thing is we're actually not even bodies, being used as batteries. We just are in this AI program, in a sense, right? There's no externalities. The opposite perspective is kind of modern sciences. Some people within modern science's perspective that it's just mechanical. We just are our material, right? We are just our brains. We are just our organs. There is no mind. There is no spirit. Right? This is a kind of biological predestination. We could just calculate everything mathematically and know everything if we had a big enough computer. It's just electrons and protons and neutrons. That's all there is, right? That's really all this is, right? Which we kind of have taken as a dogmatic idea that, it's all just electrons, protons, and neutrons. But, there is some of this that just doesn't make much sense. Why am I here making a podcast, a video about dualism and Descartes and transgender, and why are you listening to this if it's just electrons, protons, and neutrons spinning around each other in oblivion, right? It's kind of odd, right? As much as it seems like, well, Spinoza's out there, maybe materialism is right. Well, both are kind of out there, right? Both are kind of strange. The hylomorphism just brings it all together, right? Yes, we are electrons, protons, and neutrons, and there's a teleology, right? And it's part of creation, and there's something deeper and more meaningful behind it, right? It explains why we're watching this video and I'm making this video right now. This idealism, again, kind of Baruch Spinoza, is rejected by the classicists. Jacques Maritain, who's a wonderful Thomist, Aristotelian, says these epistemologies of idealism, skepticism, right? You can't trust the outside world. Descartes' skepticism. Says there's no worse philosophy than a philosophy that despises nature. A knowledge that despises what it is itself is nothing. Right? A cherry between the teeth holds more to it than the mystery of the whole idealistic metaphysics. Right? This idea that we're all just spirit and ghost, there's nothing in it, right? It's just it's banal, right? It's boring, right? Because nothing means anything. There's nothing means anything. Nothing's going anywhere. If this is all just, we're all in an AI program, right? If you think maybe Black Mirror or something like that. If we're all in right, this is just virtual reality, then how does any of it matter, right? This is Groundhog's Day, right? Drop the toaster in the bathtub, right? If this is all just a hologram, right? None of it matters, right? The person you love isn't really there. God doesn't really exist. Any good you do doesn't really matter because the people that you're helping aren't even real people, right? Suffering doesn't matter. Nothing matters. It holds no mystery at all. It's just kill yourself. That's the response of this level of idealism. Why? What's the point of anything then, right? Thomas Aquinas, he says the existence is individual and singular and understood through the senses. And this, I think, he points out a very good perspective. For sense judges a particular object, while reason judges the universal. This, again, is beautiful hylomorphism, right? So my mind sees this particular plastic red clip, right? It sees this particular thing. But it's my mind that says, well, is this like other clips? What could you do with a clip like this? I wonder if they make any other types of clips. Oh, I bet I could dry my clothes with a clip like this. Maybe I could close a bag of chips so moths don't get into it or something like that, right? I wonder if I could recycle this clip. I wonder where it came from. I wonder who made the clip, right? I wonder how much it cost, right? My mind can start making universals and asking questions about it, right? that's the phenomenal, right? That's the noumenal, right? That's the mind, that's the spirit. But my mind can also, through the senses, well, I can measure how big it is, I can weigh how heavy it is, I can see what it is, right? It's both, right? What is true? Well, what I can see and touch and feel is true. And the questions and the universals that I can come up with are also true, right? They can also be true. And both, they work together. Now, Ayn Rand was clearly not aligned with the church and its theological principles, but Ayn Rand was most influenced by Aristotle, right? She really thought Aristotle was the only philosopher worth reading, and she was very against Kant and Descartes and Spinoza and all of and Hume and all of that crowd, the skeptics, right? They were the skeptics. And she said that Kant is the real villain of our age, right? You could have said maybe Descartes too, but said he preached that the mind is not valid, right? This is Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. The mind is not valid. That the thing you perceive is not there, right? This is skepticism, right? The matrix. You can't trust what you see. It might just all be AI. Things that you perceive are in the phenomenal world and the noumenal world, which you cannot perceive in any way, is the reality. So we see the material world, right? We look around, we see the material world. That's not real. What's real is the noumenal world that's in my mind, which you can't see, right? Which I can't see your noumenal world. You can't see my noumenal world. I can't even always see my own noumenal world, but that's what's real. That's Immanuel Kant. The villain of our age is this idea that you can't trust the material world around us. There's some truth in this type of skepticism. There's some truth, right? You're driving down the highway and you see trees on the side of the road. How much of that is just your mind filling in the gaps, right? You're driving, you're really paying attention to the road, you're not paying attention to the trees. You see green things with brown coming out of the ground. Your mind just kind of fills in the gap, trees, right? It's based on our past experience of trees, right? Our mind, the noumenal, fills in the gap. Sometimes we're not even looking at the road in front of us, right? The mind is filling in the gap, right? We don't, in your own house, you probably aren't looking at your countertop. You have looked at your countertop, and now when you're wake up in the morning and you go to make your coffee, your mind sees a little bit of countertop, and your imagination fills in the rest of the countertop. Right, this is practical, right? This is kind of like cookies in your computer, right? The things the websites you go to regularly, your computer keeps those pictures on file so that the next time you go to the website, it doesn't have to re-download them. It's already there, right? Your cookies. The same way with the human mind, right? You have a certain amount that's already, because you see it all the time, it's regular. You already have it kind of in there, so that when you see your nightstand, you don't actually look at your nightstand. You just kind of get a glance of your nightstand, and your mind fills in the gap. This is true, right? This is true. To say then that none of it's real, no, right? That's not the realist perspective. The realist perspective would be, well, I might not have really looked at that tree entirely, but that tree is entirely real, right? It's either there or it's not there. But it doesn't only exist in my mind, right? I might have, right? I swear I had my keys on the counter. I didn't see them. Well, they're either on the counter or they're not on the counter in real life. You might not have seen them, but they're either there or they're not there. That's realism. Skepticism says, there might never even have been keys, right? It's all could be in your mind. Now, the application of this in the modern world, right, the modern theory, is kind of dangerous, right? It's kind of crazy. And, the average person, according to G.K. Chesterton, the average person is a Thomist. The average person is a realist. It's only philosophers who go on these crazy ideas that say, nothing is really real, right? ask the average factory worker if nothing is really real. Like, they'll be like, what are you talking about? Get out of here, right? The average person is really Thomist realist, right? An Aristotelian. So Rachel Ann Williams, she kind of sees herself as a philosopher, and I have no reason to doubt her. Although I think in my book I called her a sophist at one point, but I didn't really mean it as an insult. But this idea that your emotions can be more important than reason, it would make it sophistry, and I don't think she would disagree with that. But she argues that there's nothing male about a trans woman. The term male simply is not appropriate as applied to trans women. They do not have male bodies because only males have male bodies. And in my view, trans women are not males but females. So the part of the body or physical characters they have is only appropriately described as a female. This is the noumenal versus the phenomenal, right? So if your noumenal, right, your spirit is female, then the phenomenal is secondary or subjugated to your spirit. The phenomenal is subjugated to the noumenal, right? So if your spirit is female, then your body is then female. But from a more realist perspective, you would start with the body and say, well, the body, well, let's look at it. You know, what are the chromosomes? What are the hormones? What is its ability to reproduce? What is its, the size of the bones, the size of the heart? You know, what are the objective criteria of the body say? And from there, you would then make the claim it is a. You start with the phenomenal and you move to the noumenal. From a Rachel Ann Williams' perspective, you start with the noumenal and you move to the phenomenal. But this is skepticism, right? Because you can't trust what you see. She goes even further. Penises are not male because some women have penises. Vaginas are not female because some men have vaginas. XY chromosomes are not male because some women have XY chromosomes and some men have XX chromosomes. You know, this is again fully, the focus is on the noumenal, not the phenomenal, right? It's what you feel you are, what you believe you are, that's what you are, not what is physically present, right? If I feel this bottle is a tree, it is a tree. You say, but the objective criteria says it's made out of plastic, it has fluid in it, it is probably a bottle, right? But I feel and I believe that it is a tree, right? So that's, if the noumenal is first, then then this is a tree. If the phenomenal is first, then it is a bottle, right? Rectus appetitus, right? The right appetite, right? The rectified appetite, right? That our feelings are subject to reality is realism. To go beyond just, you say Rachel Ann Williams, she might be an extreme case. Well, I know she doesn't see herself as extreme, but it's an extreme case. But how about the rest, is the rest of the world going along with this? Well, people like on Men's Day in 2019, the ACLU tweeted out, there is no one way to be a man. Men who get their periods are men. Men who get pregnant and give birth are men. Trans and non-binary men belong in International Men's Day, which there's multiple things that you could challenge on this. One, non-binary is saying you are neither male nor female. So how would you be part of Men's Day if you're non-binary? You shouldn't be part of Men's Day or Women's Day if you're non-binary. Or I guess maybe you do both, I guess. But this is clearly the noumenal, right? If you have your period and you get pregnant, but you say that you feel as if you are a man, then you are a man, even though your body and your bodily functions are female, right? Men's Day. Another one is the feminine product always responded by taking all the feminine imagery off of its feminine packaging. So the tampons and pads removed feminine imagery because men can menstruate and need pads. Again, the thing that would make you male would be, the female would be your noumenal, right? That's all that matters. And even Rachel Ann Williams went as far as calling it girl penises, right? That trans individuals could have female penises. Okay. And lastly, I know Jean Vanier is a bit on the outs. He's been canceled, but his philosophy and theology is still good, even if he had made mistakes within his life, and we probably all have. So I keep him in here. But Jean Vanier's epistemology, I think, is important, and I bring him up again later on as well. He ran the L'Arche communities, the communities that worked with people with disabilities, but he had so many volunteers have been through L'Arche. So he's reflecting back on this in 1997. And he says, my experience shows me that there are two kinds of ideals. One which focuses on structures, another which is more directed towards people. The first tends to be militant, seeking to reform social structures and relying on good organization and a form of propaganda. The other stresses the importance of listening, patience, and kindness, changing one heart at a time. So this again, I think, is an example of the noumenal versus, is the skepticism versus the realism, right? Realism and the virtues focuses on changing one heart at a time versus the kind of this noumenal modern approach, which is looking to like quickly change the whole structure of everything, right? Moving towards a new world order, right? Moving towards, if we just eliminated poverty, everything would be okay. And although eliminating poverty is a positive thing, there are more important things than money, right? The ability to have relationship, right, in the matter, right? Send everyone a check for $1 million. Is it really going to solve all of the suffering? Not really, right? Right? Might solve somebody's problem, but for the majority of people, there's deeper values that lead to happiness. That's kind of realism. The second quote from him, I think, is even better. Young people who focus their energies on people tend to live closer to human reality, and those who seek to change through the theory structures of the perfect way of life than those who seek to change through theory structures of the perfect way of life. The latter can quickly become ideologies that crush people instead of leading them to greater freedom, wisdom, and compassion. Right? This is Goethe's Faust. Right? This is Mephistopheles and Faust. Right? Faust is modernism, wiping out the old way to make ways for. There will be no more suffering. There'll be no more poverty. There'll be no sickness in the world. But you need to get rid of this old traditions, right? The holistic way of being, the natural way of being. And then we will solve everything. And if anybody gets in the way of this progress, we'll just wipe them out because it's progress for the sake of progress, right? Versus, again, back to his earlier quote, listening, patience, kindness, changing one heart at a time. It's more the realist approach to it. Okay, so that's all I have here on epistemology. Next, we'll be moving into Chapter 3 finally. So can't wait to get to Chapter 3 where we get into more of the contemporary issues rather than into this kind of framing of the issue from a philosophical perspective. Okay, have a great rest of your day.